Somewhere out there, someone just told you that retiring at 40 is impossible unless you're a tech founder or you got lucky with crypto. That's wrong. I ran the actual math. Real expenses, real withdrawal rates, real investment growth. And the salary you need to retire by 40 is a lot more specific and honestly more achievable than the fantasy numbers floating around the internet. But here's the catch. It's not about the salary alone. It's about the gap between what you earn and what you spend, and almost nobody talks about that part. My name is Wealth, and I help people understand money and make smarter financial decisions. If you've ever wondered whether early retirement is actually mathematically possible for a normal person with a normal job, stick around, because by the end of this, you'll know the exact number and why most people chasing it are aiming at the wrong target entirely. Here's the myth first. You need to make six figures to retire early. That gets repeated so often people treat it as fact. It's not. Income matters, but it's not the variable that determines when you retire. Savings rate is. A person earning $60,000 who saves 50% of their income will retire years before a person earning $200,000 who saves 10%. That sentence alone breaks most people's assumptions about this entire topic. So let's build the actual framework. To retire by 40, you need enough invested assets to sustain your spending for the rest of your life without earned income. The standard benchmark is the 4% rule. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio annually, adjusted for inflation, and historically that money lasts 30 plus years. Some people use a more conservative 3.5% for an early retirement that needs to stretch 50 years instead of 30. We'll use both because the difference matters more than you'd think. Let's start with the number everyone actually wants. How much do you need saved by 40? If your annual spending in retirement is $40,000, the 4% rule says you need $1 million invested. The 3.5% rule, more appropriate for a 50-year retirement horizon, says you need $1,142,000. If your spending is $60,000 a year, those numbers jump to $1,500,000 and $1,714,000. At $80,000 a year in spending, you're looking at $2 million under the 4% rule and $2,285,000 under the 3.5% rule. Notice something already. The number that matters isn't your income. It's your spending. That's the entire game, and almost nobody frames it that way. Now let's reverse engineer the salary. Assume you start at age 25, giving you 15 years to reach your number, and you're investing consistently at a 7% average annual return. To hit $1 million by 40, you need to invest roughly $3,300 a month, or $39,600 a year. To hit $1,500,000, you need about $4,950 a month, or $59,400 a year. To hit $2 million, you need about $6,600 a month, or $79,200 a year. Here's where the salary question actually gets answered. If you need to invest $39,600 a year, and you're also paying for housing, food, taxes, and everything else, you need an income substantially higher than what you're investing. Assuming a 25% effective tax rate and reasonable living expenses, hitting that $1 million target realistically requires an income around $85,000 to $95,000 a year, with an aggressive savings rate near 45 to 50%. To hit the $1,500,000 target, you're looking at an income around $120,000 to $135,000 with a similar savings discipline. And to hit $2 million, you need somewhere around $155,000 to $175,000 a year, maintained consistently for 15 years with no major derailments. Let me introduce you to two people to make this concrete. Meet David. David earns $90,000 a year working as a mid-level engineer. He's not a founder. He's not in tech leadership. He's not exceptional in any way that would go viral on social media. What David does differently is that he lives on $45,000 a year and invests the other $45,000 after taxes, roughly $38,000 annually, into low-cost index funds. He drives a car he bought used for $9,000. He lives in a two-bedroom apartment with a roommate until he's 30. He's not miserable. He still travels, still goes out, but every purchase runs through one filter. Does this move my number closer or further away? By 40, at a 7% average return, David's consistent $38,000 annual contributions have grown to just over $1,020,000. He hits his number. He retires. Meanwhile, his old college roommate Marcus earns $140,000 a year as a sales director. Marcus makes more than David every single year for 15 straight years. But Marcus also upgraded his lifestyle every time his income went up. Nicer apartment than a house. Newer car every 3 years. More frequent vacations because he earned it. Marcus saves about 12% of his income, which is actually above the national average, and it feels responsible. By 40, Marcus has around $340,000 invested. He's nowhere close to his number, and he's still 15, maybe 20 years from retirement, despite out-earning David by $50,000 a year every single year for a decade and a half. This is the part that should stick with you. The gap between David and Marcus wasn't income. It was the percentage of income that turned into invested assets instead of lifestyle. David's advantage over Marcus, in dollar terms, is worth more than $680,000 by age 40. That's not because David is smarter with investments. Both of them own basically the same index funds. It's because David decided early what his finish line was and then treated every dollar above his baseline, spending as fuel toward that line instead of fuel toward a bigger life. Now, let's talk about what most early retirement content leaves out, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. The math I just walked you through assumes your investment returns behave. Historically, 7% average annual return is reasonable for a diversified index fund portfolio over a 15-year window. But averages hide volatility, and volatility matters enormously depending on when it happens. If the market drops 30% in year 14 of your 15-year plan, right before you're set to retire, your $1 million target might actually be worth $700,000 when you get there. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it's the single biggest threat to anyone retiring early on a tight, calculated number. The people who retire successfully at 40 don't hit their exact number and immediately quit contributing. They build in a buffer, often retiring with 10 to 20% more than their bare minimum number, specifically to absorb a bad market in the first few years of retirement, when it does the most damage. Here's the second thing nobody mentions: healthcare. If you retire at 40, you are decades away from Medicare eligibility. In the United States, a family's health insurance on the private market can run anywhere from $800 to $1,800 a month, depending on your state, your age, and your coverage level. That's $9,600 to $21,600 a year that most people's early retirement calculators simply don't include, because most early retirement calculators were built by people who hadn't actually priced this out yet. If your target spending was $60,000 a year and you forgot to add $15,000 in healthcare costs, your real number wasn't $1,500,000. It was closer to $1,875,000. That's not a small rounding error. That's an extra 4 to 5 years of work you didn't account for. Third, and this one catches almost everyone, the psychological cost of an extreme savings rate for 15 straight years. Saving 45% of your income doesn't just mean skipping vacations. It means watching your income go up over a decade and a half and consciously choosing not to let your life expand with it, while nearly everyone around you does exactly the opposite. It means turning down the nicer apartment, the newer car, the bigger wedding, over and over for 15 years, while people your age are living what looks like a completely normal, unremarkable life. This is why most people who attempt this don't fail, because of the math. The math works. They fail because 15 years of delayed gratification is genuinely hard to sustain, and nobody warns you that the hardest part isn't the spreadsheet. It's the social pressure of doing something your peers think is borderline insane. So if the salary alone isn't the answer, what actually determines whether you get there? 3 levers, and they matter in a specific order. Lever 1. Your savings rate matters more than your income, but income sets your ceiling. A 25% savings rate on $50,000 gets you to retirement in roughly 32 years. The same 25% savings rate on $150,000 gets you there in the same 32 years because savings rate, not income, drives the timeline. But a higher income lets you hit a higher savings rate without feeling it as much because your baseline expenses don't scale linearly with your income. This is why the David and Marcus story isn't really about income at all. It's about which one of them let their spending track their income and which one didn't. Lever 2. Your spending number determines your finish line, and most people never actually set one. If you don't know your target annual spending in retirement, you cannot calculate the number you're aiming for, which means you're not actually working toward early retirement. You're just vaguely saving and hoping. Sit down and calculate your real number, then build in a 15 to 20% buffer for healthcare and market volatility, and that becomes the actual finish line, not a guess. Lever 3. Protect the timeline from lifestyle creep every single time your income rises. This is the lever almost everyone breaks. Every raise, every bonus, every promotion is a decision point. You can bank the difference toward your number, or you can let your spending rise to meet it, and most people, without consciously deciding to do the second one. The people who actually retire at 40 aren't the ones who never got a raise. They're the ones who got raises and kept living like they hadn't. Here's the number that should actually stick with you. At a 45% savings rate, most people reach financial independence in roughly 19 years, starting from zero. At a 25% savings rate, it takes closer to 32 years. At a 15% savings rate, which is roughly the national average, it takes over 43 years, which is longer than most people's working careers even last. The difference between retiring at 40 and retiring at 65 isn't luck, and it isn't your job title. It's the percentage of every paycheck that becomes an asset instead of a lifestyle upgrade. If you take one thing from this video, take this: stop asking what salary you need to retire by 40, because that question sends you chasing a bigger paycheck while your spending quietly grows to match it, which is exactly what happened to Marcus. Ask instead what percentage of your current income you can actually bank starting this month, and whether you're willing to hold that percentage steady while your income grows around it for the next 15 years. That's the real question. The salary was never the hard part. The discipline was. If this changed how you think about early retirement, subscribe to the channel and check out my breakdown on the compound interest crossover point, because understanding when your money starts working harder than you do is the other half of this entire equation.